In this video, we're going to do a long-term review on the Maxxis Razor MT tyres. So before we get into all the juicy bits of mud and rock and really what you're here to hear about, I just thought a best off cover off bitumen work or tar roads. In the dry, obviously they work. Why wouldn't they? And in the wet, to be honest, they work really well as well. Now this thing's got a bit of get up and go with the V6 3.8 motor. I can get second gear on a single spinner going on the back if I want to, but if you're driving sensibly, it doesn't break traction, it brakes well when you're coming up to the lights and that sort of stuff. Now on road, for this vehicle, which is weighing about 1.8 metric tons, 1800 kilograms, I run them at about 30 PSI. Obviously, every vehicle, every tyre, every driver and every road requires a different pressure. So that's an indication of what I do. It may be nothing like what you run on your vehicle. So I'm running the Maxxis Razor MT 33 12.5 by 15 inch tyres. Where I live doesn't have any sand worth talking about. I'm talking about sand dunes where you can see what happens. We can drive a couple of beaches, but it's as boring as bat's poo and it doesn't really do it for me. So I haven't actually tried these in sand. The best tyre for sand is a bald tyre, a balloon tyre. I've always run mud tyres on sand, and there's people out there, you can't run muds on sand. Oh, come on, give it up. Absolutely, you can run a mud tyre on sand. They perform brilliantly. The only thing about them is, if you start to get bogged, get off the power, because they dig quick. So when I'm off-road, like currently, I've got the tyres set on 14 PSI. Now, a couple of times when I was working and it was particularly wet, I did drop them down into the 10 to 12 PSI range, which the tyre's perfectly happy with, but the wheels are not. I'm not running bead locks, and so two things happen. First thing is the tyres would rotate on the wheel, which can put your wheel balance out, and it can at times develop a bit of leak. The other thing that happens is when they're at that pressure and you slide into a rut, you can put dirt into the bead and then they start to develop a leak. I have had that happen with these tyres as well, and I've popped two of them off the bead. Again, I slid sideways in a rut and it popped them off the bead. Two different situations, so I was fine, I got out of the trouble. Look, at the end of the day, that was purely because I was at such a low pressure. I don't think it's fair to lay the blame on the tyre in those situations, but I wanted you to know how I've used the tyres and where I've had issues, okay? If you were running bead locks and you wanted to run these down at that 10-pound sort of mark, or even possibly lower if you're a lightweight vehicle like this with a larger tyre, I don't think you're going to have very many problems at all. So that's a little bit about that side of it. Now let's get out there and have a look at what they do in the mud and what they do in the rocks. So these tyres, being a mud tyre, they are designed to be used in that muddy type environment. Now I've used them in wet, sloppy mud like you just saw there, where it was quite wet, but there's that soupy mud on the bottom, and they grip and they hook in and they do a good job in that situation. Then we have the situation where you've got that dry type mud that's sticky and tacky and like clay, and it just binds into the tread blocks and the tyre becomes a slick. Or many mud tyres of this caliber and this type will do exactly the same thing because the consistency of the mud is so sticky. But what I find with these tyres, the Maxxis tyres, is that if dial a couple of numbers and get a bit of wheel speed up, and the mud does get chucked out of the tread blocks quite easily and quite readily. So that's a good thing. thing. I just want to underline that. That doesn't mean we get out there on the trails and start dialing numbers and carrying on like pork chops. That's just destroying the bush. Now, you as a mature driver and a mature operator should know what's appropriate. I've found the tyres work very well as a mud tyre in that mud environment. The other place they work quite well is that side slope. You know, you're going along on a side angle, and they do hold the vehicle reasonably well on that side angle. The other dimension is the steering. When you put a steering input in, you want the vehicle to go in that direction. And if the tyre hasn't got traction, it's not going to steer where you want it to. But with these tyres, I'm finding they do have enough traction to steer the vehicle where I want it to go. Let's talk about rocks. The first time I took these tyres out, I took them up a track which had this nasty piece of rock on the side of it, and there's an image which I reckon we'll put in the video now, and it's got the front left tyre holding the whole front of the vehicle up in the air from one of the side lugs. It was in that moment I just realised how much traction this rubber compound can give you in the rocks. Now, the rock that day was dry. We didn't have all the mud and water over it like we do today. The vehicle had never driven that rock step before, but with these tyres being fitted up brand new, I drove the rock step for the first time ever. Absolutely blew me away at how much traction these tyres can give you in the rocks. Now, I don't understand the compound, I don't know how they make it, I don't know any of that. What I know is it worked and I liked it. It was very, very impressive in the rocks. Now, even this climb which you've watched me do just now, where the tyres are covered in mud and they're wet, and my mate Luke's gone up before me and put mud all over the rocks and that, even with that, with a little bit of gentle momentum and only my front locker, because my rear locker's not working today, I was able to get up this climb with these tyres. And as you can see, the tyres have started to lose the mud that was built up in them just through that bit of working and flexing. So I think that's a good thing. I see that as a positive. You've got muddy, wet tyres on rock, making the worst of it, and yet the tyre is still doing the job. So I'm very impressed with them in the rock situation. Now, I have run these on wet rock where it's raining, and they still do a surprisingly good job. Obviously, when it's wet, it can be a very difficult situation to get traction. So I'm not going to say that they're like amazing, but they were certainly pretty impressive and they did the job. So there is one negative with these tyres. It's something that some of you won't appreciate. Me? I couldn't care less. But everybody asks the question, what are they like for tyre noise? I'll tell you this, when you drive these out of the dealership, you will be blown away with how quiet these tyres are. You really can't hear them. You would think you're running an all-terrain tyre. They are that quiet. But I've found that after about 5,000 kilometres, they've started to get a bit of noise to them. And I guess that's just wear, and maybe the leading edges of the tyre blocks is changing. I don't really understand tyre technology enough to know why they've got a little bit noisy. They have been rotated and stuff like that. They've been run at correct pressures. So I'm not sure why. I just think it's because they're a mud tyre. They're an aggressive off-road tyre designed to work well off-road. If you want a quiet tyre, these may not be the tyre for you. So go and look at some of the other range of tyres that Maxxis is running. So I hope that's helped you understand a bit more about the Maxxis Razor mud terrain tyre. I'm very happy with them. I think they're probably going to get something like a 4.5 to 5 star rating out of me. They're certainly working for the way I use my four-wheel drive. Now, if you've found this content helpful, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button and then hit the thumbs up button or the bell button so that you can just show your support for what I've done in this video. All right, guys, I'm Mad Matt. Stay safe on the trails.